Britain's Queen Elizabeth has laid out what the government plans to do before the general election, and it includes freeing up fracking for shale gas, even on private land. Downing Street wants to change the law on trespassing, which would allow energy firms the right to tunnel hundreds of meters below people's property without their permission. Let's now cross live to George Barda, a social and environmental justice campaigner. George, thank you so much for joining us here on RT. Well, what is your assessment of the situation? I mean, is this likely to get an easy ride through Parliament, or have you got anyone fighting your corner in Westminster?
I mean, there are significant civil society forces working against this. Unfortunately, we have a situation where the opposition party is, and this is pretty much across the board, is really failing to take any kind of courageous stand. They oppose the details of what the Conservative Party is doing, what the coalition is doing, but they haven't had the courage yet to really oppose the fracking industry on behalf of the many, many local people that are against it. And I mean, this is quite an interesting electoral situation in that recent polls have suggested 74% of people, including a significant majority of Conservative voters, are against this new move, which one needs to see as a part of a series of attempts to remove the power from people to have any control over what's happening to them. So up until now, many thousands of people across the country have banded together to try and prevent this toxic technology coming to their communities. And so the government tends to do this. First, they lie to people and try and persuade them to do what big business wants them to do. Then they try and bribe them, which is what they've done in this case, with sort of cash incentives for local councils. And now that hasn't worked. They're just trying to change the law to ride roughshod over the will of the people. So it's a very interesting situation, because it doesn't seem, it's important to understand that this party is paid for by big business, and so it's an interesting gamble they're making. They're going with big business, even though most of their voters are against it.
Yeah, Prime Minister David Cameron is one of the most vocal supporters of fracking, but he's got to be concerned about losing votes then if it is so unpopular with people next year.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is very much a gamble. The reality is that the Conservative Party is paid for by big business. The Sun newspaper, owned by Rupert Murdoch, is very much behind fracking. That's the most sort of popular newspaper in this country. They even did a sort of a special edition to try and motivate people to be pro-fracking. So what they're essentially doing is gambling that pleasing the big money that pays for them is more important than pleasing their voters. Because obviously big business pays for the media, so they're pretty much relying on the fact that keeping big business happy will get the result.
George, in France, for example, in Holland, which are Britain's neighbors, protesters managed to somehow force their governments to ban fracking. But do you think you'll ever get such a protester sort of attitude in the UK to, make things
was there
different
ever,
and change?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Giving the example
I didn't quite hear that question. Was there ever?
Sure. Given the example of France and Holland, where people managed to, ban fracking in their countries, do you think this is likely to happen in the UK?
I think it may well happen. I think it's going to take a lot more struggle. But the evidence is very interesting that because of all the propaganda, there are still quite a number of people that say, maybe we should go ahead with fracking. They've been sort of lied to and told that the lights won't stay on otherwise. But what we do see in the polls is that in the question of whether it should happen in your local area, virtually everybody says no. So what we're going to see is a continuation of what we've seen so far, namely every time fracking companies try and dig into into the ground underneath these communities, there will be opposition. But equally, I imagine that the government will continue to try and use its power to ride, as I said before, ride roughshod over the will of the people. So this is really a battle between big business and the power of local communities to organise against that big business.
Sure. Well, George, at this point, though, thank you so much.
Our future relies on it, pretty much.
It does indeed. But thank you so much for sharing with us your concerns on the issue. That was George Barda, social environmental justice campaigner.